Stephen Lloyd-Moffett, class of 90, parent of a current first-year student, has spent a career studying the religious lives of people around the globe. Today, we'll share how drinking wine can contribute to a full spiritual life. Based on over 100 interviews on 3 continents, Professor Lloyd-Moffett reveals a surprising spiritual side to the wines we drink. This will be a great wine tasting and nothing like we've hosted before, so we're very excited to try it today. Stephen Lloyd-Moffett is a professor of comparative religion at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, Cal Poly SLO. Most recently, he's the author of The Spirit of Wine, Finding Religion in the Fruit of the Vine, and The Spirit of Winemakers, Finding Religion from the Vineyard to the Bottle. Professor Lloyd-Moffett studied film studies and economics at CMC. He is the class of 1990, as I mentioned. Hopefully a number of family members and classmates are here as well. Stephen, the floor is yours. Thank you again for doing this and welcome.
Yeah, so Evan, I am class of 94. I see the 94s out there. It's good. My dad was 64 and hopefully my son will be 24. So we're spacing our connections to CMC out on 30-year basis. So hi, Dad, I see you there, and my sister as well, and my son, all together watching this. So one thing I want to say is, first off, feel free to drink throughout this presentation. In fact, it just gets better the more you drink. So I encourage you to sip with abandon. I am going to share for about 40 minutes with some options there along the way. Hopefully everybody can see the screen here. This whole project began for me out of a class I teach at Cal Poly called The Spirituality of Wine. And I have to say, I'm in my office now. You see it's a very professorial office with images of my college roommates up. But down the hall, my dean was not excited when I proposed this class. And I thought she would have a problem with the alcohol part of it, even though it was for 21. But she wondered whether young people drink wine and would enough people show up for the course. And I said, "Are you serious? I'm proposing drinking for credit." And she said, "We'll see." Well, the first day it opened, the class filled and there were 65 people on the wait list. So it's been one of the popular classes here at Cal Poly. And during it, I really do encourage the students to partake of the wine, and so should you. The advantage of this version of the class is none of you have an exam at the end. This is all just for fun. But I do think that all good wine events should begin with a toast. So pour yourself a glass if you haven't already. And during these COVID times, let us toast in a religious leaning toast. So, God made humans frail as a bubble. God made love, and love made trouble. God made the vine, so was it a sin that I made wine to drown our troubles in? Cheers, you all. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks to CMC for putting this all together. Now, Fred Leibowitz once said, great people talk about ideas, average people talk about things, and small people talk about wine. Well, I am going to try to be a bit of a category error here. I'm hoping to talk about wine in some bigger framework. And I won't try to get too academic here because I think at this hour of the evening and given everything in the world, we want to drink wine together. But one of the things I've realized as I've undergone this process of writing a couple books in the last decade on wine is that as you look at trends in religion, there is a marked move away from institutions and traditional religions. So about half of millennials and Gen Z have zero trust in religious leaders. The fastest growing category of religious type is the spiritual but not religious. the fastest growth of when you ask what category do you affiliate with, the fastest growing category is none. I affiliate with no religious ideas. And so one of the things I've realized is there's a lot of people that still have a spiritual instinct, but no longer trust the institutions that have provided the frameworks to fulfill those. And so wine can become one of those mechanisms to find a deeper spirituality outside of traditional institutions. And so one of the things I've said a lot in talks is that, if you have a spiritual community that you are happy with and trust and believe in, fantastic. Not trying to take you away from anything. But if you're looking for something, maybe there's spirituality already present in your life. You just haven't seen it. And so this is my excuse as a religious studies scholar to just drink a lot of wine and talk about wine, because I think wine, if you see it if you set aside the traditional markers of religion and are open to different ways to experiencing transcendence, experiencing community, experiencing mystery in your life, and arranging your calendar, wine can play that role. I sort of fell into this when I got a job at Cal Poly. There's 600 wineries within an hour of my house. And so inevitably, I started getting into wine. I eventually started making wine. I eventually planted a vineyard in our backyard. And then this whole project began when I realized that some of the most religiously devoted people I know are actually devoted to wine. And they don't see themselves as traditionally religious, but they, if you set aside these traditional categories, they devote themselves to wine in a very religious way. And so the first book, The Spirit of Wine, is really about like the devotees. And I even have a sort of checklist to test whether you're a wine devotee. That is, do you join multiple wine clubs? Are your vacations mostly pilgrimages to wine centers? Are your closest friends your wine tasting friends? Does your idea of a scandal involve oak extract or someone putting ice cube in Chardonnay? Is the amount of wine in your cellar the clearest sign of your belief in an afterlife because there's no possible way you could drink it in one lifetime? Sort of you check 5 of these 7 things, you are a wine devotee. And the first book is all about exploring the spirituality of wine for people. The second book was really about the spiritual motivations of winemakers. So I interviewed over 100 winemakers around the world and asked them why they make wine. And some are traditional Christians or Jews, but others are influenced by Eastern spiritualities. Others are influenced by more esoteric spirituality. And so the second book was really about the spiritual motivations of winemakers. And I encourage you to purchase both those books on Amazon if you want to know more than that, because today we're actually going to do like a guided wine tasting together. So how to drink wine spiritually. So what I'm going to do is do 5 tips on how to drink wine spiritually, and then we will drink wine together, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So first off, I have to point out that not all wine can be spiritually uplifting. I've come to realize that there's a lot of wine out there, and a lot of wine that college students drink, that just doesn't have the capability to uplift you in a spiritual way. The rule of thumb is anything with a critter on it is probably not the potential for a spiritual encounter with wine. But you have to have something there to react to. So one way I like to think of it is some wines are wines and some wines are beverages. Well, what's the difference? A beverage, if you go and get a bottle of Coke or something like that, you expect it to taste the same everywhere in all places, no matter what year you are drinking. You would never say, oh, I like the Atlanta 2005 Coca-Cola. No, you want Coke to taste the same always. Well, there's a lot of wines that are intended to be that way. For example, Jacob's Creek, one of the best-selling wines in the world. Their Cab Shiraz, they make 10 million bottles every year of it, and every bottle tastes the same. Well, in that sense, you are drinking a beverage. There is no variability. There's no imprint of the winemaker. A wine to have a spiritual impact on you has to have some distinctiveness. So if you want to write in the chat what wines you have, we can also sort of group share these as we go. But assuming you have chosen a wine worthy of a spiritual experience, how do you make wine spiritual? Well, first, it begins by just being present with the wine. In other words, if you are just slamming wine in the background, it's unlikely to be spiritual. It's got to be the type of experience that you stop and be with the wine. One of my favorite wine writers, Terry Thies, says, the greatest wines are the ones you can't write notes about because you're weeping, overcome with their loveliness. This happened to me in a restaurant in Paris one evening. The waiter must have thought my wife had just told me she didn't love me anymore, was absconding with a plumber. No, I was just the damn Duranicon, which is a wine from northern France. This, like all wine experiences, will jump out of the darkness at you, but it's okay. It's part of the spell. Don't fear the weeper. So you have to be there with the wine. And I think this begins with opening the wine. So many times we're drinking wines, we have some fancy, wine opener that you push a button and it just goes. Well, I'm a big fan of the old style because when you actually put the corkscrew in, that can be a sort of muscle memory for I am about to start something meaningful. And so that process of pulling the wine out can begin that mindfulness. But then also one of the things I've come to realize with drinking wine is you need a routine that keeps you centered in the wine. And the analogy I like to use is from basketball, is that when basketball players shoot free throws, they all develop a routine that keeps them centered so that they do the same thing, whether it's the first quarter of a league game or 10 seconds left in the world championship. And they all develop a routine. Well, they develop a routine because it centers them as they go about something big. So what's a good wine routine? Well, some of you have been drinking wine for years, and this will be old hat. But for those who haven't, I have 7 S's to help you, to help remind you. And we can do this today with one of the wines in front of you. So the first S is see. So lift up your glass and look through it. And what do you notice? Do you notice a sort of browning on the outside? Is it clear? Is it cloudy? Is it, there's all sorts of things. How dark is it? Oftentimes you can tell the age by looking at it. But being aware of the site will give you clues about the wine and what the varietal is and what age it is and what stage it's at. So you begin by looking at the wine. The second S is to swirl it. Now this is both fun, but it also is a scientific aspect to it. That is, swirling it oxygenates the wine and allows the aromas to develop. So a nice swirl along the path. And this often brings up the question of wine glasses for particular varietals. Riedel, the great wine company, has done all this research about what shape swirls best And so there are a lot of different shapes that go with wines. This is the wine glass I have is a Burgundy glass. And it generally, I like it for a lot of different ones, but it just fills the whole glass with aroma. But you might consider picking glasses that fit the wine you're drinking. Then smell. And this is, you really want to put sort of the whole glass in your nose, just really, really deeply breathe in. And I'm one for me to really smell something well, I often will sort of close my eyes and plug my ears so that I can just concentrate on what the smell is. And the smells of wine can be all over the map, from flowers to fruits to funny things, diapers of its off and things like that. So smell the wine, and then you sip it. Now, when you sip the wine, you kind of want to let it coat your mouth. And that is, let it go all around the mouth to allow it to hit all parts of your taste buds. Then if you are tasting a lot of wines, you might spit it in a spit bucket. Hopefully tonight, where everybody's at home and safe, and feel free to swallow away. But one of the things you'll notice when you're swallowing the wine is how long the taste lingers. And generally speaking, the longer it lingers, the better the wine is, the more interesting the wine is. So sort of notice it. And then the sixth S is savor it. So I think a lot of us, especially probably Claremont grads who are go-getters and entrepreneurs, love to get to the important part, but just sit with it for a second before you judge. Wait. And then I think it's also then important to share it with others. So when you drink, savor it and then communicate with others. For wine to be spiritual, like most spiritual events, it needs to be in communion with others. So if you want to share in the chat your impressions of the wine you're drinking, you might just say, hey, I've got this Pinot Noir from Willamette Valley Vineyards, and it tastes to me like dried berries or something. Feel free to share with everybody what you have. But what I like about this 7 S's is it gets you into a routine so that you can actually appreciate the wine. Now, there's lots of instances where you don't need to do this. If you're just going to have a porch pounder on a summer afternoon, that's a lot of fun too. But those will probably not be your spiritual wine experiences. Second of all, so the second piece of advice, once you have centered yourself with the wine, like most meaningful things in life, you need to have a relationship with something to bring depth to it. Yes, you can drink a wine and just forget it, but it won't have the same impact upon you. And so one of the things I tell the students is, avoid the one-night stands with wine. Just like one-night stands, hey, those can be, fun. They might have a role, but to really have something meaningful, you need to develop your relationship with it. And this means getting to know the wines you're drinking, getting to know about them, knowing the varietal, knowing the producers, knowing the winemakers. I would say about 80% of the wines that my partner and I drink, we actually know the people who made the wine. And that changes how you experience the wine. So part of this is really understanding where the wine comes from. Because one of the interesting things about wine is it's almost the only product where every single version of it says the date it was born and the place where it was birthed. That is, every wine will tell it to as specific as possible where it came from, and the year in which it was made. We don't do that with anything else. I mean, even with beer, very rarely will it say, oh, this is a 2018 vintage Coors. No, we don't really do that. And so part of knowing the wine is knowing that it is expressing a place at a particular time. And this was really impressed upon me when doing interviews with Jacques Lederer, who was the winemaker at Louis Jadot, a very famous Burgundy wine area. And he said, when you taste wine, it will transport you to a place and a time. And not just to Burgundy in 2004 or whatever, it will transport you to a hillside. And to prove this point to me, we went down to his cellar and at Louis Jadot, and where his great wines are, they're all aged in a mandala-shaped cellar because he thinks the spiritual energy of the mandala shape makes for a better experience. And we drank 3 different Pinot Noirs, all from adjacent hillsides in Burgundy in the Gevrey-Chambertin region. And it was like drinking 3 completely different wines. They were all the same clones. They were all harvested around the same time. They were all made in a lot of the same way, but they all reflected their hillside, even though these hillsides were only a quarter mile from each other. And the notion in French of this is terroir. Terroir is one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot in wine, but I like Matt Kramer's definition the best of it, which is it is the somewhereness of wine. That it is the way that a wine expresses the place where it comes from. Other people have called it a distillation of place in a bottle or liquid geography, something like that. But it is about the soil. It's about the climate. It's about the topography. It's about the plant life around. One of the distinctive areas of South Australian wine is a taste of eucalyptus. And having made wine in McLaren Vale for a season, it's because most of those vineyards are surrounded by eucalyptus trees. So you get that in the wine. And so when you get to know the wines you're drinking, you get to know the terroir, the place where they came from. And so tonight, we're all drinking Pinot Noir. And Pinot Noir is become one of the popular grapes after the runaway hit Sideways. It is a grape that is best known in coming from Burgundy, France. So in Burgundy, there's only 2 reds they're allowed to grow there, Pinot Noir being one and Gamay the other. So let's go through a process of getting to know this Pinot Noir. So one of the entrees into understanding Pinot Noir is to realize that this is a grape that's been grown in Burgundy since the 14th century, when Philip the Bold discovered this grape and named it Pinot Noir. And I love there's a early story about this where just 20 years after Philip the Bold named it Pinot Noir, there was a vineyard manager. And a vineyard hand had mixed in a grape that was other than Pinot Noir into the harvest basket. The vineyard manager was so mad that he beat the vineyard hand to death. And we have a record of the trial because the vineyard manager admitted to beating this vineyard hand to death, but his defense was he was defiling Pinot Noir. And the court judge said, after all, that was justified murder for defiling Pinot Noir. So people have been obsessed with Pinot Noir for over 600 years. In fact, if you know your religious history, there was a while that the popes had moved to Avignon. And once things had been worked out with Rome, there was a big debate about whether the Pope should move back to Rome. And one of the big arguments around the debate was Rome was so far from Burgundy, how were they going to get Pinot Noir? And the Catholic Church deemed Pinot Noir the fifth element. Now, I don't really know what the first four elements are, but if you have enough Pinot Noir, it doesn't really matter at that point. So people have been excited. I did an interview with Clive Coates, who wrote this 700-page book on the wines of Burgundy. And of all people who looks like they belong in an English colony, Clive Coates does. And after a whole day of being with him, he really is not a spiritual man at all. But then when you read what he writes about Pinot, it brings out this hidden poet that you would think most English would have a hard time expressing. So like this, he says, Pinot is a wine which can sing like a nightingale, shine forth like a sapphire, intrigue like the most complex of chess problems, seduce you like the first kiss of someone you're just about to fall in love with. More of a great Burgundy can inspire like a great orator, satisfy like the most subtle of three-star meals, and leave you at peace at the end like a slow movement of a Mozart piano concerto. At its best, the wine is complex but not puzzling, profound but not didactic, perfect but not intimidating, magnificent but never anything less than a friend. Another writer says, Pinot appeals to our higher and base instincts, hijacking at once both the primordial amygdala and evolved frontal cortex. A good Pinot places you truly under her bliss. You pass orgasm and go directly to postcoital bliss. That's a wine you want to have again. Matt Kramer, a great writer for Wine Spectator, says, even the most skeptical are willing, after savoring a generally great Burgundy, to concede that there may well be, dare one say it, a presence in the universe beyond our own. And then another writer says, the flavors of the greatest red Burgundies are sensuous, often erotic, above rational discourse and beyond the powers of measured criticism, as they flout conventions in favor of something rooted in emotion and passions too powerful to be taught, too ancient to be meddled with. And so the idea here is when you drink a Pinot Noir, you're stepping into a passion, a grape that has inspired people for years. Now, I asked many of you brought an Oregon Pinot. So let's look, if you're going to know the wine, let's look at the history of Pinot in Oregon. The first vines were planted in 1965 by a founding group of hardy winemakers. And what inspired them to plant in the Willamette Valley was the realization that if you look at the parallels, the equivalent of Burgundy in France is not Napa Valley, but it is Willamette Valley. And so as they were looking for a place to grow, they said, hey, this is closest to Burgundy. And so knowing the history of the Willamette Valley becomes a part of it. I'm drinking a Willamette Valley Vineyards Pinot Noir. And this is an interesting story too, especially perhaps for some CMCers, because it was the first publicly traded winery. It's been publicly traded since 1988. And the founder, Jim Bernal, is still still responsible for it. So it's one of the older wineries in Willamette. And if you want to learn about their terroir, what you realize about Willamette is it often gets this breeze in from the ocean. And so it will have fog, it will have some coolness to it, and it sort of lingers in the hills of the Willamette. And as a result, Willamette Valley vineyards and Willamette wines in general tend to be lower in alcohol, lighter in body. It tends to give off more strawberry notes, sometimes some earthy notes, something like that. And so if you're going to know the story of the wine, one of the things I do in wine workshops is before you drink, we do a sort of guided meditation where I take you to the Willamette Valley, where you close your eyes and we enter into the valley and enter into those woods, entered into that crisp air and into the fertile floor of Willamette Valley. Because when you put your mindset there, you taste it in a different way. But there's another part about knowing the story of the wine, and that is knowing the lifespan of the wine. So when I think of wines, you want to think of much like people. Young wines tend to be brash, tend to show potential, but often have a few rough edges on it. At the prime of life, wines are mature and most interesting. And eventually, wines tend to get over the hill and go bad. They tend to smell like bandages, and you begin to lose it. And so part of knowing the story of a wine is knowing what phase of life it's in. So this one is a 2019. So it's a young Willamette Valley vineyard. It was a very mild summer. Rain happened in the fall there. So the 2019, if we're going to go back to that year, we want to remember what that year was like with the wine. One final note with this wine, it's actually a whole cluster fermentation, which means that normally you take the stems out of the wine and you crush just the berries. In this case, they actually kept all the stems in there. So you're actually getting a taste not just of the berries, but also the stems in it. And so knowing the wine means going to that place at that time with that varietal and having a relationship with it. By contrast, the California Pinots are much drier, warmer climate. There's more sugar, higher alcohol in it. The result of this is a very different kind of wine. Tends to be fruitier, more full-bodied than the Willamette wines. I'm drinking a wine called Bloodroot, which is a interesting collaboration. But there's 4 different winemakers who came together to make this, and their desire was to show the soul of a place in a bottle. And so this Sonoma wine is trying to be the essence of Sonoma. And so when you know the story of the wine, you come to be transported to the place of its making, the year in which it was made, the varietal that is behind it, and then all things being equal, getting to know the people involved will make a difference for you. You'll get to experience the wine in a richer way. Third would be open to the mystery of wine. That is to go into wine not knowing what to expect. One of my favorite interviews was with this woman, Anne Moret, whose family had been making wine in Burgundy for 300 years. And at the end of the interview, we were underground at her family cellars. I had my recorder off, which I was just saddened by. But she grabbed me and she said, "Stephen, when people realize that wine is more than alcohol, it will be a more important step for humanity than going to the moon." And I've always wondered exactly what she meant by that. But there is something about realizing mystery and transcendence in wine. And if you just look at the big picture, there's 100 different species of grapes in the world. Only one of them makes wine. And that species of grape can be grown in less than 1% of the planet. That is, it's something that is so unique to the human experience, yet we've been making it for almost 10,000 years. And being open to the mystery of wine means being open to entering into that stream of history. Ben Franklin realized this when he said, "We hear of the Christian tradition of turning water into wine as a miracle, but this conversion is through the goodness of God made every day before our eyes. Behold the rain which descends from the heavens upon our vineyards, which incorporates itself with the grapes to be changed into wine, the constant proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy." And in fact, the Old English word for yeast is "God is good" in it. Galileo says wine is sunlight held together by water. And one of the things that I encourage to be aware of the mystery of wine is to try to get out of the boxes that wine professionals want to put you in. So instead of using the aroma wheel to be like, where is this on the aroma wheel? What is the proper terminology for this? Is this, white pepper or blue pepper? Is to really express it. And Basil, my son, is watching here. And one of the examples I use in this is when Basil was about 10, he would watch us drink wine again and again and again. We gave him a sip of wine. And I said, "Basil, what does it taste like?" And he gives this very formal, wine speak that he had heard. Because Basil's a smart boy, he got into Claremont and could repeat what we had all said. And I go, Basil, you didn't find that. What does it actually taste like? And he takes another sip and he says, strawberry pop rocks. You know, that candy you put in your mouth that sort of sparkles. And I tasted it and I was like, that's it. That's it. That's a good palate, right? And it was because you don't need to fit it in to some fancy terminology. Just allow it to happen. And one of my favorite wine tasting notes is written by a friend of mine in Australia, and he says this is what a professional should write. This is about 2005 Sangiovese from Castagna. Sometimes I think she glimpses at me over her shoulder, but not often. No white of eye, only mascara and cheekbone. She sits here on my desk with her back to me. Once I thought I saw lipstick, so fleeting it may have been a smudge in my brain, a tragic shard of lust. It's all shiny black leather, disappearing in the dark to a raven muss of hair. She's beaming Morello cherries and Valrhona Coude, whatever that is, 80% chocolate. And she's wearing Jean d'Espèce Bala Versailles to enhance the fact that she hasn't showered for days. When she moves her legs, I hear stockings and that scarlet Loubertine clack. That's a great description of wine. And the less we sort of force it in to some really strict way of judging wine, and the more we are creative, the deeper relationship we will have with it. And so for my classes, instead of writing professional tasting notes, I have them draw pictures of what the wine tastes like, or pick songs from Spotify of what the wine tastes like, or write a haiku about what the wine tastes like. And there is a sort of insight that we've discovered over time that in many ways, prose is just not the right vehicle to describe wine. In many cases, music and art are more appropriate for describing wine. Fourth thing, because I want to wrap up to allow some time for questions. It's always important to drink with friends. If you're going to have a spiritual experience, you've got to have somebody to commune with. One time I asked a friend of mine who's an old Italian guy, and I said, is it okay to drink alone? He said, no, never drink alone. You must be able to talk to somebody. You must have a communication about the wine. I said, wisdom from the old world. He goes, you must at least have a dog or a plant to talk with, but you can never be silent in the face of wine. And this is what the important part. If you look at the studies on religion, what keeps people back more than anything is the community that comes with it. So creating a wine community is one of the most important things. A regular group of people with whom you drink and allow the exploration of wine to happen. And so this, like many times, requires some forethought. So getting a group together and creating a wine night. You might do the same varietal across countries, so Cabernet around the world, multiple varietals within the same country, like drink different varietals of Argentinian wine, multiple years of the same wine, all the wines from a given producer, the most obscure grapes you can find, the wines with the best labels, the worst labels. Everybody brings their best bottle or their cheapest bottle, or do competitions. And then when you drink with others, don't just say, do you like it? Do you not like it? Or is it a good wine or bad wine? Bring up questions that lead to deeper thoughts, like what emotion does this wine evoke? What images or associations or colors or memories does it inspire? What music does it bring to mind? If this wine was a painting, who would be the artist? This wine was a celebrity, what would it be? This wine was a car, what would it be? This wine was an item of clothing. One of my favorite ones is, if this wine was a relative of mine, who would it be? And what happens is that once you start talking about wine in these terms, you end up having those deep relationships, and wine becomes the vehicle to create that. The last thing before we open it for questions is cultivate a spiritual drunkenness. Now, there are certainly many ways to be non-spiritually drunk. And talking about wine in a spiritual way has its hazards. Because, for some people, wine cannot be enjoyed in a spiritual way. And that's okay. We need to be aware of that. But there's also ways to drink that are spiritual. And I think many of my students, when I encourage them to cultivate a spiritual drunkenness, think that it's sort of like being buzzed, like, sort of part drunk. And that's the way to drink spiritually. But it's not that at all. It's not how much you drink. It's the attitude with which you drink. And here, I originally studied monks, and the monks provide a great way to think about being spiritually drunk. The monks were big drinkers. Saint Benedict's rule says that every monk should drink a bottle and a third a day of wine per monk. So if you're on the bottle schedule during COVID, you can just tell your doubters that you're just acting monastically when you are drinking. One monk said, Brother John said, "Never did a man of worth dislike good wine. It's a true monastic truism." The monks would often have competitions on drinking. So to drink like a Capuchin is to drink poorly. To drink like a Benedictine is to drink deeply. To drink like a Dominican is pot after pot. But to drink like a Franciscan is to drink the cellar dry. So they managed throughout history to combine spirituality and drinking. And it's because of their attitude towards drinking. And here's something that I learned actually from Father Dominic, Dave Legg, who became Father Dominic Legg, who's now professor in Washington, D.C. Because one of the things he talked about at his Dominican seminary was a rule among the Dominicans that you could never pour your own glass. You always need to pour other people's glasses. So if you want wine, you actually give wine to others. And to me, that's the monastic attitude towards drinking. And it's drinking with gratitude, that is thankfulness for the people that you're drinking with, for this creation, this wine that's been in front of you, your health, and then an attitude of giving, that is to share your wine with others is one of the great gifts that we can do. And so cultivating a spiritual drunkenness doesn't mean how much you drink. It's the attitude you bring to your drinking. Are you thankful? Are you giving? And if you are, I think that's a spiritual drunkenness. So 5 things, advice for finding spirituality in wine. Be present and mindful when you drink. Know the story of your wine so you can have a relationship with it. Be open to mystery through your wine. Drink with a conscious community, and cultivate a spiritual drunkenness. And that, I think, can lead to a deeper relationship with wine and with other people through wine. So with that, I thank you for listening, and cheers, and we will open it up to questions.
Thank you, Stephen. That was wonderful. Any questions in the chat, or you can also virtually raise your hand, or
yeah, I see Mark has raised
it. Mark Schwartz, the floor is yours.
There's a lot of pressure asking the first question with this quite assembled group. Hello to Susan and Gordon Bjork. I just want you to know I was writing about Bank Sim earlier before this started. So, Stephen, even in front of Evan Rutter, I have to say this was the most amazing CMC wine experience that I've had, virtually or in person. And I'm a big fan of Packing House and Stephen Strider. And thank you so much for this mindful meta-tasting, where you really combine spirituality, mindfulness, and total appreciation for wine drinking. One of the things I've tried to inculcate into my children and younger family on the holidays is getting them to taste wine before they're legally allowed to reinforce the concept of good wine and fine single malt scotch is not a vehicle for getting drunk. It's for appreciation. That's why God made it so expensive. So having said that, I'm a value proposition guy. I love the wine area that you're in. Paso, many wonderful experiences. One of the things you did not mention is pairing of food and wine and how the combination is a synergistic process where 1 + 1 = 3. So spend a moment on proper pairing and how that can take you to newer heights of
Yeah.
wine. Thank you so much. I'd love to get your contact information. I think I can get it off the CMC alumni
Sure.
website.
Yeah, or Cal Poly, just Google Cal Poly religion. I'm everywhere. But yeah, no, it's a great question. I'll deal with the value proposition one first, though, because I do have a tip. If you're looking for cheap, good wines, Trader Joe's can have some good wines. But here's the tip: whoever buys wine for Trader Joe's actually has a good palate. They have some good wines, but they realize that most people buy wines for the label. So go to Trader Joe's and buy the worst label, because if it has a bad label, knowing that the guy or woman who buys wine has a good palate, they must have bought it for the wine. So there's your value proposition. But with food, I think, there's so much work on the spirituality of food. And so, as you say, when you combine food and wine together, you can have that synergistic feeling. So much, just as wine can take you to a place, so can food. So, John Ferrand and I got to sail in the Greek islands together, and having a Greek dish with a Greek grape, those two were they were bred together, and they uplift each other. I have to say, actually, while I'm thinking of John, the best wine tasting I have ever done was in the Cauldron of Santorini with a CMC trip. We had all the CMCers scour Santorini for a white wine, and then did a tasting on a boat in the Cauldron. And then the second best was actually on that trip too at Sunio, where everybody brought a red wine to the ancient temple at Sunio. But what's interesting about both those things, it is both it's the place and the wine and the people together. And those are the three qualities that when you can combine those in the right way, that's when the magic happens. So Mark, I think you're right, bringing food into it and sharing that.
Just one quick thing about value proposition. So I have a spreadsheet and I track wine by the rating and the price. And what I do is I take the rating and divide it by the price to get a value component. And basically, you won't go wrong doing that. And Cameron Hughes, overproduction of fancy wines, taking off the label, available at Costco.
Nice.
Question in the chat, Stephen. Does the price of wine increase or decrease its spirituality? Any correlation there? Price and spirituality.
One of the things that's interesting about preconceived notion is that there have been studies on wine that it actually changes how you experience the wine. So they've put people and hooked them into MRI machines and given them wine through a straw and looked at how their brain reacts. And when you tell somebody this is an expensive wine, a different part of your brain reacts before they even taste it. And when you give that exact same wine, but tell them it's a cheap wine, your brain sort of prepares itself in a different way. So I don't want to say that, the cost of the wine is irrelevant, but I think it's more in your expectations that changes how you experience it. So that being said, so I think it does change how you taste it. I think, one of the reasons why some wines are expensive is because they have a very special place, land. And so something like Cologne in Napa Valley, or, obviously like Domaine Romanée-Conti and Burgundy, these are really special places that for whatever reason, their grapes express themselves in meaningful ways. generally speaking, those wines will not be inexpensive because they are paying for a special place. But that being said, there's a lot of wines that are expensive for expensive taste, just for being a luxury item. And I would be surprised if most people could tell the difference of it. There's not a one-to-one correlation between price and taste.
Question in the chat about, you mentioned Trader Joe's and kind of your tip there. What about Costco? Is Costco similar?
Yeah, Costco's a little different. The deal with Costco, I think the tip at Costco is they have nationally distributed wines, and then they have the local wines. And local wines are usually where the best value is at Costco. So they'll have something like, well, for example, Willamette Valley Vineyards is in every Costco in America, right? It's good. It's a good price there. But the San Luis Obispo wines that they sell at the San Luis Obispo Costco are where the real values are. So figure out what the local wine that they're selling, because a lot of my wine business friends, they'll say, oh, I discovered a half a pallet of this. I don't want to sell it. I'll just drop it off at Costco and get rid of it quickly. So those are often good values. Yeah.
Great. Carl Patton put a question in the chat. Almost all of the notes I have read about wine refers to fruit, herbs, or soil. However, I heard a comment that was unique: old books and tobacco. Is that a thing? Where are we getting books and tobacco and leather versus all the things from the land?
Yeah. Well, so it all comes from the land, right? Nobody is adding anything to it. But for some reason, certain varietals tend to express elements in ways that are not predictable. Like Touriga Nacional is almost always menthol that you can tell. A ripe Syrah often will have that tobacco sense. But it's really, what we're doing is we're having a sense experience and then trying to put words that match it most closely for us. And so we're trying to express something. And this is where I think there's also a parallel to religion. So many spiritual experiences defy prose. Something happens. And when you try to sort of describe it in very particular terms, you sort of take the spirit out of the experience. And a similar thing happens with the great wines you have. And so you have it, you experience it, and then you go through your Rolodex of adjectives, trying to find something that's like it. And so, Carl, I think like when you're having tobacco, it's like there's something there. And then people have gone through their Rolodex of experiences and been like, oh, that something is similar to the smell of tobacco or something like that. And that's why I really encourage people to sort of throw away their aroma wheel, which is a very technical way of describing wine, and really just sort of go with their heart in what comes out. And also, one of the things I point out in the book is some of the most memorable wine experiences I've had with groups have not been the great wines, but actually the really bad wines. The wines that you taste together and you spend a half an hour describing is this cow dung or goat dung that it's being, or is this Band-Aid or is this gauze? Some of the most fun experiences with groups tasting wines have been those just stinker wines that you can commiserate together with.
We have time for one last question, Stephen, before we hit 6:30. Let's see, where was it? Oh, Stephen asked a question. What is your favorite winery in Paso to visit? So maybe a two-part question. One is what's your favorite to visit? The second is, what is your favorite Paso wine to drink? And they could be the same, but they also could be very different.
I'll give you a couple. I really there's a wine called Kukkola, which is a Finnish name, and he's a Finnish American. And man, his wines are just, they're great. So Kukkola, Kukkula. I also like one called Line Colodo, He's a really generous guy who's been making wine for a long time. He does all blends with some zin in it and some other things. But Line Colado, Linnea Colado. Both those are both great to visit and great to drink. I think down here, just a few blocks from me is Timbre, Timbre, a really great Pinot maker. Those are fun wines, but there's just so many great wines out there. And one of the great things about being part of a wine community, being part of a wine club, is getting to know the winemaker and then the fellow people who are part of that community, and seeing them again and again and sharing the wines with each other is always a memorable part.
Great. Stephen, thanks so much. It's 6:30. I know I did not get to all the questions, so my apologies, but I do encourage you to reach out to Stephen directly. I'm sure he'd be happy to hear from everyone.
Yes.
At this point, Stephen, a huge thanks. I think we should bring you back at some point soon. Maybe look at a different region of the world or of the US or a different varietal. If you're willing, we'd love to have you again.
Of course.
And with that, everyone feel free to unmute, say hello, say goodbye, say thank you. And we hope to see you at our future programs. Thanks, everyone.